Welcome, folks, to a shortened edition of our Coaches Connect call for today. I'm Coach Jeremy. We've had quite a bit of discussion already, but we're going to jump into our case studies and let's put these coaches to the test, see what kind of insight we can gather from our coaches roundtable for today. And our first case study is from Coach Stacy. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick, and I'll give you the rundown. So Coach Stacy mentions that they're looking for some insight on where to go next with a client. And for reference, they are using ProCoach, and I believe they're also an L2, a level two grad. The goal is weight loss, and Coach Stacy is currently working on behavior change, and they're focused on building skills for less mindless eating in the late afternoon. So they have quite a specific uh, uh, kind of area of focus right now. Their current practice, as labeled in ProCoach, is noticing and naming. So her daily action is the three components of notice and name, as detailed in this infographic. So I believe this infographic, again, is from the L2 course. And as long as it stays within this community, I think that's fair use. So they're looking at, what am I noticing about this situation and their reaction to it? What would I name the thing that I'm observing? So any thoughts, emotions, or feelings that bubble up in that scenario. And then particularly, I think they were looking for, how do I choose to respond? So the goal for this client in this practice currently is to create awareness and gather data before changing anything, or before changing how she responds or she's choosing to respond. So Coach Stacy's question is kind of summarized in particularly point number three. When they get to number three, how did I choose to respond? What are some purposeful ways to shift towards choices that she wants more of? So choices that bring them closer to their overall goal, which I believe they said is the goal, again, being weight loss. So a little more info. By default, she's finding that at times she's naturally responding more positively, which is probably because of increased awareness. And as an example, instead of kind of going into that 4 p.m. snacking black hole, they're starting dinner instead of grabbing popcorn. So while she's always in the driver's seat, she does often ask for guidance. So in this example, the client is saying to the coach, "Hey, coach, I've noticed that I've started to positively make some changes. I'm not falling into that same hole as repetitively, but we may want to help provide some alternative actions for this client to pursue in that space to help fill in kind of that 4 p.m. between lunch and dinner gap." When she's ready, what would the next daily action possibly look like? So that's the question for you coaches. What next action would you encourage your client to pursue as they are starting to build awareness of the previous pattern and looking to change into some new actions? So I think this is a fantastic case study. I gave my response already in the bottom here, but I'm curious to see, what would you as a coach potentially pursue with your client? What new action do you think might be valuable for them to help uh, reach the desired outcome of weight loss? Karen.
Jeremy, that sounds just like me. What I was going through was the
Mhm.
afternoon between the 3 to 5 o'clock. Wanted to, like, I would grab something, let's say chocolate bar or something like that. So
Mhm.
what I did to change that was think, am I hungry? Am I bored? What's going on that I have to constantly eat? So what I did change was, how we do the hand size portions and that. I decided to, okay, fill it with some protein that's going to fill me up, and with some
Mhm.
fiber, or like it could be yogurt or some fruit or some in that area. So it's going to fill you up, or a protein drink with some berries and spinach and things like that. I hope that answers the question.
Fantastic. No, I mean, I think in coaching, it can be useful to rely on our own experience or the experience of our other clients to help kind of provide some context of what can come next for our clients. So, if the goal is weight loss and we're helping them to improve kind of some of their nutritional choices, so if we're going from, yeah, popcorn and chocolate bar to protein and fiber, that can certainly be something that helps them to improve their nutritional choices. Although I also will say, popcorn tends to be really low calorie for the amount of volume that it provides. So as long
If
as
you
it's
don't
not
put
drenched
butter on
in
it, yeah.
butter, Exactly. Yeah, it's not the worst choice, but the general sentiment of what you're sharing here is improving nutritional quality can certainly be a way to help this client to take that next action step, and
Yes, I
it
did
is
that
something
with my
worth
husband. Like
providing.
he wasn't eating hardly any protein in the house. So we had a discussion about protein. He was buying like the flavored yogurt, but they weren't Greek
Mhm,
yogurts. Well, we kind of switched from the bad yogurt to the Greek yogurt with fruits in it, but that's a step in
mhm,
the right direction. So
mhm.
that's one positive thing.
100%. Yeah, improving nutritional choices, certainly a path to pursue or potentially to at least explore with that client. Juliet, how about yourself?
Well, I'm thinking that that might be the time to ask about the environment. Like, you're hungry and what's around to eat, like right
Mhm,
away. And so if there's chocolate bars in the cupboard and that's all there is, that's, what you're going to do. So maybe talk about the what is there to eat, and then maybe start switching, to fruit, having fruits around.
mhm,
And also what's going on at this particular time that makes the person hungry. I mean, have they been, going on errands, moving, that
mhm,
now there's like a drop in of energy and they need to pick up something. I mean, energy wise, what's going on that suddenly there's a need for food, and what might be the best replenishment for that. And if it is eating early, like this client seems to be doing, well, maybe that's the answer. Uh, uh,
Yeah, all fantastic feedback. So, in pro coach world, like if we were to pick some practices there, it sounds like uh, building awareness around their kind of environment. So, that potentially looks like modify your food environment. Are there some things there where it's like, if I didn't have this in the environment, I actually would be able to tolerate this hunger pretty easily, and I feel like I would make better choices if this thing wasn't there. Conversely, if I had some other foods present, would that help me make better choices as well? So modify your food environment might be a next action for this person. Uh, some of the other things you said there as well in terms of uh, just having a meal at that time. So prepping and planning your meals, having things on hand, or just having your plan be, I'm just going to move my meal time up a little bit because it seems like that is a signal that my body is giving me. So it makes sense that uh, I'll just eat at that time if I'm hungry, if there's no other barriers, and see how does that improve things? Does that then get rid of that errant snacking in between? And also, you kind of turned your attention to what happens prior to that meal. Uh, a practice like record your intake might be very valuable to see, are we eating enough at our previous meal? Are we getting adequate protein and fiber at that previous meal that would help us feel more satisfied and feel more stable moving through that period? All very useful strategies that I think Coach Stacy can potentially explore with her client as well. Melissa, I saw you pop in and out for a second there. Anything that you would add, or
Well,
anything that you would explore with that client potentially?
I would definitely explore their intake
Mhm,
prior to this time of day, um, and make strategies or help form strategies that alleviate the hunger. Um, how many calories is she getting in at her first meal or at her second meal? And I would probably investigate the timing of her meals, just circadian rhythm. What is,
mhm.
you know, is it normal to be hungry at this time? Maybe she's torturing herself for no reason. Maybe it's
Right.
like, as far as grabbing a meal, it's not unreasonable maybe for her to reason, based on her calories prior, her macros, things like that. Um, if you got that fixed, and just even look at her normal timing and what she's been, and patterns and habits, maybe it's just reasonable for her to eat at this time. And I guess I'm more like, and I haven't really studied this immensely, but I'm not like an eat after six person. So to me, 5:30 is a
Mhm.
reasonable time to grab your dinner. So that's what my insights would be.
Fair enough. Yeah, and, a few months ago now, I spent some time on the West Coast and we were trying to keep East Coast hours, so that meant that all of our meals were like way earlier. Man, that
Right.
4:30 to 5:30 dinner reservation, the early bird special, fantastic. Always got a
Right.
table, always
Yeah.
nice and quiet in the restaurant. Not a bad
Yes.
time at all.
I'm on the west
Uh,
or over in the west. So yeah.
Perfect. So you know what it's like. A nice rainy day in the Pacific Northwest and getting the early bird special. Can't think of many things better than that.
Right.
But yeah, so it sounds like record your intake specifically prior to that meal to ensure, hey, are we getting adequate nutrients before? Are we eating uh,
Hmm.
not only kind of food composition, but also timing? And then is this giving us a reasonable outcome for right now? Like, does that help explain why we're in that place? Does it make sense to move up your final meal a little bit? Would that work in the context of your life? Those are all things I think worth exploring with this client. Uh, I wanted to see if there was anything else that I potentially. Oh, so two things that I actually added in my response as well that we didn't cover here uh, would be actively de-stressing. So understanding, I think actually Karen had mentioned this as well. Is this actually hunger? So that kind of 2 to 4 p.m. lull that a lot of us experience uh, quite predictably through many of our days, where it's like if you're working from home or if you're working in an office setting where it's like, I'm just going to make my way over to the kitchen or to the pantry, look through the cupboards a little bit while I'm kind of on a phone call or doing another task. And it's like, I wonder what's in there. It's like, I know what's in there. It's nothing that I really want to be eating right now, but it's actually kind of boredom that is leading the challenge or just like a normal drop in energy, not necessarily hunger. And this is related to something that is not hunger related. So maybe the solution is something else. Like maybe I use this time to take a nap. Maybe I use this time to meditate. Maybe I use this time to change my environment by taking the dog for a walk. And that also leads into the other suggestion that I made for Coach Stacy as well, which is uh, getting outside. So not necessarily outside in the environment, but just changing your current environment. If this behavior happens quite predictably in the same space, is it beneficial for me to change where I am during that time or change another element of my routine so that there's a little bit more friction and I actually feel that hunger, but don't need to respond to it with a nutrition based approach? Those are some things that I considered as well. Any other final items here to share with Coach Stacy as she works with her client? Cool. Uh, yeah, I think this particularly, I really like this case study. It's something that I think most of us can relate to, uh, either in our own lives or in our coaching life. Like you're going to have this client who has that errant kind of snacking, whether it occurs in that between lunch and dinner period or after their final meal, where it's just like, hmm, food can be a solution here, but it might not always be the solution. And if we change other elements of the routine, how does that influence our food decisions? Is a question worth asking. Uh, and also, it gave me an opportunity to plug Pro Coach. So I'm happy with all of those things. Let's go on to our next case study. I'm going to skip this one for right now, unless anyone feels passionately about coaching teenage boys here. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that not a lot of people here are working with male teenage athletes in particular. Cool. We can skip this one. Uh, Here's I think, a really interesting case study as well, and it's from Coach Kyle. And Coach Kyle is asking, hey, I just had a kickoff meeting with a new client, and in the end, the client was given 7 tasks or 7 practices to work on for this initial period of time. Is that too much? Coaches, I'm curious to know what are your initial thoughts to kind of that statement. We don't have a lot of information here, so there's certainly some question asking. You can see in some of the comments that folks were asking about some follow-up information. But I'm curious to know, based on your coaching approach or your coaching experience, does 7 action items for that first initial period feel like too much to you? We'll go the Goldilocks zone. Is it too hot, too cold, or just right?
At first glance, it seems too hot. It seems like too much.
Mhm.
If somebody's reaching out to be coached, if they were, in my opinion, if they're super motivated, um, they probably wouldn't require slash be seeking coaching. It could just be
Mhm.
for knowledge, and maybe they are super knowledge motivated. They just don't have knowledge and the steps, or the ability to break down their goals into steps. So that could be a factor too.
Mhm.
But I guess it would depend on their motivation level and their buy-in, because everybody's different. And you could do 7 action steps, and then if the client seems really on fire, and
Mhm.
then peel it back and say, well, maybe this is a reason why they have a hard time meeting goals, because their expectations may be too high for themselves. So you could help them
Fair.
regulate that behavior where they go too hot and then have failure because it's too much. So you could you could try to level that out for them, but let them kind of crash first, so to speak.
Fair
You
enough.
could. Mhm.
Yeah, there are definitely some valuable points in there, Melissa. Uh, Karen or Juliet, any other feedback that you would say, given the question of is 7 tasks too many to start with?
Well, I kind of like one of the answers that says, how did your client feel about committing to and following through? So I would definitely dig into that with the client and
Mhm.
making sure that's really something they want to do and they can, and maybe get feedback on, if they say, yes, yes, I can do it, then digging even more and say, well, it sounds like you have support. Does it sound, it sounds like you have XYZ to make it work. Am I correct? And then
Mhm.
just dig in a little bit more to make sure that, because it could go the other way, that the person ends up feeling too committed and then just give up, you know.
Right.
So it's like it's like having the skills to do something. Here, it's not about skills. It's about making sure well, it's part of the skills, making sure you can do it. And because often, we can say, yeah, yeah, sure, I can do it. And then realities, takes over, and then you don't, you can't, blah, blah, blah. So,
Fair enough.
mhm.
Karen, anything from you?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. It's just like, okay, they can be all ready, willing, and able. It's just like asking them, how ready are you? How able are you? The things that we're taught and that. It's just like they'll
Mhm.
say, oh, I can do all this at once. And then when you get back with them in a week to find out if they did these, they probably would say no, because it's too much all at once. Like, do it give them a couple goals to go by and see how that goes. And then if they can do those, maybe add one more to it and see how it goes with them. So it's just testing and trying to see what works with them. I hope that answers the
Mhm.
question, because that's how I
Yep.
would approach it.
Fair. And yeah, I mean, I think my response would be very similar to the collective here. One thing that I'll point out for, at least for the responses that Coach Kyle got from the majority of folks in the thread is very much a kind of like it depends, and specifically like how the client is responding. Like, what do they think? What is their personal desire? Like, we don't really have enough information to immediately be like 7 is clearly too much. My personal coaching experience tells me that 7 is probably too much, but I don't know this client well enough to make an assessment here. So starting with the instinct of kind of gathering more information and taking that it depends kind of approach, I think is a good starting place for a lot of coaches as we're offering feedback here. And then the feedback shared by the three of you here is also incredibly useful in that uh, depending on the client, what are they asking for? What is their ready, willing, and able? How have we assessed that? Understanding that we can make adjustments moving forward are all, I think, key questions or key concepts to consider here. What I would add from my personal perspective is if a client is kind of really raring to go. Like Melissa was saying, it's like this person's like they have high motivation. They want to do all the things initially. I see that person as like a little bit of a question mark because if you could do all the things, what is your reason for reaching out to a coach?
Mm.
Because if you can do all the things, you must have find out if there's a knowledge gap at least. So that is a an interesting starting point. Uh, in terms of retooling later and taking stuff away, I personally don't like the story that it tells, especially at the beginning of the coaching experience. If you're ready to go and you want to do all the things, and I say, go, fly free, let's do it all, and you experience significant setbacks in that first week or that first period of time, it can potentially damage your enthusiasm for the approach and backfire on me as a coach because it then shows us like, oh, well, I was ready to go. You're the only new element here. Now the coaching client relationship is tainted by that initial experience. And I really want a client to experience success for that first period. I'm more concerned with them experiencing success and letting them creating the story that it's like I am capable, as opposed to any particular one action or multiple actions. Uh, it looks like I was trying to see if Coach Kyle offered any specific information. Like working on 7 things could be possible, depending on particularly like the timeline that they're working on. It's like maybe there's a need for that many things, but if this person is coming to me and they're like, this is a collaborative relationship, I may encourage them to do a little bit less first, assess how each of those things is influencing their life and their outcomes, and then add more as necessary, not just because they can. Melissa.
I definitely agree that I wanted to interject before and say,
Mhm,
momentum building and behavior, that you want to start as habits.
mhm,
Momentum, success builds momentum. So I totally agree and think if you start out at 7 and then have to backtrack, that could be discouraging. But I think,
mhm,
what do you think about if you brought up the potential for that in the very beginning in your
mhm,
meeting? Like, hey, tell me about your personality. Tell me about, you know, some of, I don't know exact questions necessarily that I would ask, but something of the nature like, or their history may indicate they've tried and tried and tried and failed and failed and failed. You could ask the
mhm,
question, you know, is there a potential that, your expectations are pretty high and you go a little too hard and it could be more successful to break it into smaller chunks,
mhm.
doable to build that momentum. So I guess if you had those discussions in the beginning and then they
Yep.
still were on fire, I mean, failure is information. So
Right.
that's discovery for them. So then they could be like, okay, well, maybe that is the deal. This is why I've not been able to be successful. And that behavior is the behavior that needs to change to be able to move
Mhm.
forward with their goals.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes falling from the nest can be
Yeah.
a very informative experience.
Mhm.
I I tend to, so I know my bias in my coaching approach tends to be quite conservative in, especially at the start. And I tend to break clients into kind of 2 different camps. So there are some folks who will come to me and they're like, I don't know what I don't know, coach. You kind of tell me everything. For that client, I really am geared towards trying to get them to take the wheel in any type of small way. So definitely like picking the actions, helping to affirm like why is that action important to them, giving them as much autonomy as they're willing to take, especially if they're kind of like risk averse from that part. The second group of people that I typically see, I get this person far less frequently, but the person who's like, I know all the things, I can do all the things, just let me run free. That is the person where I take the opposite approach and say, I'm I see that you are ready to go. You're chomping at the bit. You clearly have a long track record of at least some partial successes in there. I would like to try and take a little bit of a different approach with you. And I am personally going to ask us to pump the brakes. There's an expectation that I'm setting here that our experience is going to be different than your previous experiences. And the way that we want it to be particularly different is that not only are we going to take a little bit more time, but we're going to try and avoid the outcomes that you previously had. And by and large, with that person, the outcomes that they previously had was I really tried super hard. I white knuckled my way through that time period. It was outwardly successful and then left me burnt out and I crashed hard. And then I kept doing it and I kept doing it and I kept doing it. I want our experience to be different. Therefore, we're going to do it differently. And we're not going to white knuckle our way through it. We're not going to have to run headfirst into this challenge. We're going to take it a little bit slower. I'm purposely putting the reins on you and pulling you back because I know you're a high flyer and I know you can do all the things. Let me take the blame here if it's a little bit slower. I'm okay with that expectation. And if they still, I've had people, very few, who are like, "Oh, if that's what we're gonna do, I don't know if this is for me," and that's perfectly fine. It's better to have that expectation early on. Uh, Probably like definitely coaching over 100 clients, like maybe one or two in my experience of being like, "Oh, going slow? No, I want to do the thing I've always done." And in that case, I'm like, probably not a great coaching fit. But by and large, I get a little bit of curiosity and like a little bit of a hesitant response, but those people will then experience success like everyone else for those first few weeks. And they're like, okay, maybe there is something here and maybe I do need to slow down. Uh, it's just kind of navigating that initial space. So I think we can answer Coach Kyle's question in terms of is seven too many tasks? Hard to know unless we know the person. And it really depends on your coaching approach. If you want to provide kind of that psychological security and build and nurture the relationship, often having people do less than they are capable of initially and then build on that tends to uh, help nurture the relationship a little bit more than having them do all the things, experience potential failure, and then have to pare that back over time. It just depends on the story you want to tell. Juliet, was there something you wanted to add?
Mhm. No.
Cool. Uh, let's go one more case study and then we'll close out for today. Don't want to go with this one or, yep, cool. So this is from Coach Shelly Simpson. And again, this is, I think, a case that is going to be very relatable to any coach here when you start working with folks, or if you've already worked with this person, or maybe you have been this person. So this client is struggling with their weight loss goal due to their job. So they're a preschool teacher who's found that they've noticed a trend that they tend to lose weight in summer months when they have more time to commit to daily movement and healthy meals. But as soon as school starts back up again, they'll tend to regain the weight that they lost over the summer. Their job keeps them pretty busy on their feet most of the day, and they note some fatigue that can make putting in higher effort and workouts challenging. They also have been working on mindful snacking, so similar to our first case study, and they gravitate towards low energy snacks when they get home from work. I'm not 100% sure what that means, but we'll assume lower quality food because low energy snacks might actually be useful from a weight loss perspective. But they are also they're also on Weight Watchers. And the coach mentions that they would love to work with them on more portion control instead of a point system, but they're a diehard Weight Watchers fan and they're sold on it. So they're stepping quite lightly with that one. She's also frustrated and very tired of roller coaster weight gain and loss, and also had a stent put in last fall for AFib. I'm sort of lost what to do. Coaches, how can we help this coach progress with their client? Any thoughts pop up for you?
Mm.
I would wonder about general calorie tracking. Um,
Mhm.
you know,
So it
it
sounds
seems
like for
like
that one, they're tracking, but they're using the Weight Watchers point system. That's their way of
oh,
building
that's
awareness.
their track. They're just
Yeah.
doing the points. So
Mhm.
but I would wonder about their uh I know it talks about her not being able to, really have her physical goals, as
Mhm.
far as daily movement, and it talks about healthy meals, but I would still wonder about how much time she takes to track in her school season. She says she's doing a
Mhm.
point system, but how dedicated is she to that? Like, I would maybe want to
Gotcha.
investigate, um, you know, where she is on how much time she has to truly track, or does she kind of go by general practices, kind of just get
Mhm.
into mindlessly thinking and maybe not paying attention to calories in, even though
Mhm.
she's using foods or a program that's designed for that.
Yeah, it's certainly a system worth exploring in terms of, uh, in that particular system, how rigorously are you using it? How regularly
Right.
are you using it? Is it something where it's like, I've used it in the past and had great success, and I would like to continue using it? And then is that negotiable between coach and client? Take care, Karen. Thanks for showing up. See you hopefully next week. Juliet, any thoughts
Uh,
from this case?
Well, my thought is that it sounds like she has a very stressful job,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and she sounds like, plus having worked with kids in school systems, I know how bad the food is most of the time.
Mhm.
So is she stuck with the cafeteria and high energy food and very little fruit and vegetables? But it seems to me, as I'm reading these, that maybe the underlying issue is the stress, because she says that during the summer she loses the weight. So what's different in the summer, that's between the summer and the school years? That there's
Mhm.
something there that's that's the missing piece here. What is it that during the summer she's able to lose weight without any trouble, and then she goes back to work, and then there we go. Um, so is it stress? Is it the food? Is it, and then so that's another thing she's working on, energy density, and yeah, is she consistent with measuring the food? So I have a lot of questions going on. Yeah. Uh,
Fair.
mhm.
Uh, yeah, I mean, my feedback as well in terms of uh, where to focus with this client. It sounds like that the difference between in season or in school season versus summer vacation, it's like the most clear difference there is going to be like a change in scheduling and likely a change in stress. So those are two areas where it's like I'd want to have a significant discussion. The scheduling element actually might work in her favor a little bit. Sometimes when people are they have more constraints on their time, it's like, okay, I can clearly identify when certain activities have to happen because there's just no other practical time for it. Whereas like in the summer, if I don't work out in the morning, I can work out in the afternoon. If I don't do it in the afternoon, I can do it in the evening. I just have a lot more opportunity. I think the higher in, point there that Juliet you also made is just kind of stress and stress management. As our coach Shelley here mentions as well, uh, our client comes home after work and their ability to participate in higher intensity exercise is compromised because they're just so tired from the day, which is maybe something where it's like, maybe we don't necessarily need higher intensity exercise if this person's like, they get a great step count chasing toddlers around all day. They're quite active at work. Uh, Unless their goal is to build capacity in higher intensity exercise, maybe we downshift at home and use that as time for rest and recovery or some lighter activity that also helps them to deal with their stress. Uh, Other things to consider here would be there's a little bit of friction between coaching method and client desire. So the coach wants to use a different and uh, portion kind of control system. Client's like, no, I want to use Weight Watchers. I actually had this exact conversation with a client earlier this week where we started using the hand portion guide. Uh, and then after 2 weeks of check-ins, client mentioned, hey, I'm actually if you noticed in my intake, I mentioned that I've previously used Weight Watchers a whole bunch. I'm actually more comfortable using it. Can we switch to that? And I was like, yeah, for sure. The only things that I really need are can you use it regularly? Are there any points of your day or your uh, any elements where it's like you had trouble using it previously? Let's address those. Uh, and then can you share that information with me? So they can take a screenshot, share their Weight Watchers breakdown. It gives me all the information that I need, and it's a system that they already are comfortable with. So we can then decrease the learning curve for introducing a new thing, which is fantastic in my opinion. The fewer things they have to learn, the more rapidly that they can start to employ a system. Fantastic. And it builds awareness, it shares data, it checks all the boxes that I'm looking for. So I don't have to be married to any specific skill. One other thing that I would add is, again, based on the conversation I had with that client, particularly I asked them, so you're familiar with that style of tracking? It's worked well for you previously. Was there a break, like a point where you found that it was breaking down and you were no longer interested in using it? And they were like, yeah, after a period of time, like normally around the 3 month mark, my desire to continue using it drops off a cliff. And I was like, great, we're going to build skills in the background that will complement this so that when we get to that point, because we feel quite likely that we will, we'll be able to substitute in other skills. So we're going to work on our eating behaviors. And they're like, yes, that's where I really feel like I need to put in some work. They don't need a new tracking system. So similar to this client, it's probably a place where stress management is more useful. Let them use their old tracking system because it would be, again, less stressful than learning a new thing when they already have something that's done the job in the past. And where can we support them is likely, again, from that stress management eating behavior standpoint. And we can also have a discussion about exercise and what role it plays for right now. But as we know, exercise is not the best tool for weight loss, especially if stress is high. Adding more stress in the form of high intensity exercise may actually have less of a net positive benefit. Whereas coding exercise as a way to reduce stress may have an additive or positive benefit on their overall outcomes. That is last case study. Any final thoughts before we wrap up for today? Cool. Well, we had a smaller crew today, but we had a very engaged crew. So Melissa and Juliet and Karen, who's already headed out, thank you for being here. Caller who is also listening, I hope you got what you needed from this. And we'll have the recording up in a few days. Thank you, gang.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thank you.
Yeah.